Hello everyone, and welcome to a Circle of the World First Law video. I am going to be your host today, the Adeptus Historical. I haven't done it with a camera before, but I thought it'd be fun. I have a video that I'm going to react to and kind of test the lore. It is the Wizards and Warriors, the Magi Go to War. I'm sure anybody who watches our channel has probably watched this, and you probably have already seen it, and I've already picked it apart. But I haven't actually watched the whole thing. I tried to record this the other day, and I lost all my power. So I'm going to try it again here. Hopefully I don't lose all my power again. But I do want to note here that I'm not trying to pick this thing apart just to pick it apart. I'm just being critical, but obviously these people are fans. Even with this kind of production, it's really cool to see them put this much effort into First Law content, which is not very common out there. And also apologies for not creating anything new for some time. I've been kind of stuck on one video, and I've kind of let it get me down. So I'm going to try to do more of these videos, and maybe I'll be able to finish up the other series one day. But let's get into it.
In the aftermath of the death of Glustrad by his own hand, the average resident of the Circle of the World would have believed that a peaceful world lay on the horizon. This future would be forged by the remaining sons of Uz, who would continue the great work of their father in leaving the world a better place than they found it.
Right.
However, as with many events which occur throughout the First Law series, the darkest possible course was to be taken. The world was once more to be cast into disarray and discord due to the conflict between brothers, and in their stead, lesser men were to take the reins in guiding the nations of the Circle of the World forward.
I like it though. They're coming from an
In this episode, we will detail this conflict, which was to forever alter the course of history, and provide the basis for all future conflicts which were to devastate the Circle of the World going forward.
It's a pretty good intro.
After Glustrad's destruction, the three brothers, Juvens, Canedius and Badesh, were left alone in the world they had inherited from their father Uz. However, the number of powerful individuals capable of shaping the course of the future...
It's Eus, not Eus. Obviously, when you read the series, it sounds like the way it's spelled is Eus, but it's Eus, and that's because obviously Pacey's word is law, and that's how he pronounces it, so that's what it's going to be. But that's a tiny nitpick, obviously. If you read it, you wouldn't know one way or the other.
Was soon reduced from 3 to 2, as Badesh died at some point after the journey to Shabulian. The chronicles do not record how Badesh died, and the manner of his death remains unrevealed as of yet in this series.
I see what they're going for here. They're saying that he died and they don't know how he died. He probably is dead, but it's not stated that he has died, unless I'm missing something, which of course comment down below where that is. But he didn't die at any point. He probably is dead. There's just no record of it one way or the other. Badesh could possibly come back because of that. We just don't know. There's some theories that maybe he passed into the spirit, went to their side. He's maybe just wandering alone out there, completely lost in his magic and all of that. Or he could be dead. But he's not for sure oh yeah, he's gone.
After Badesh's demise, the two most powerful beings who remained were Canedius, who stayed holed up in the House of the Maker, tinkering with his various experiments and inventions, while Juvens took a different course of action. Juvens took on a number of apprentices who would collectively come to be known as the Order of the Magi. All of his knowledge of the usage of the high art was set out in his book, The Principles of Art, which...
Quick note, I think they do address it later, but it's kind of confusing with the way they had laid this out, is that the Order of Magi was founded before the war against Glustrad, and they were all involved in it. It was a pretty big impact. This little note here is actually why I want to make the video, because there's some little details like this that I wonder how they missed, or the way they laid it out seems kind of confusing sometimes. But I absolutely love the production and everything. It looks like they use Wonder Draft for the map, which is what I use in my videos, the ones I need Wonder Draft in, and I think it's a really, really well done overall production. But the point is that the Order of Magi was founded beforehand, and that's why the war had such a pivotal part in all of them. I mean, imagine all of them were greatly impacted. And they also had a big impact on the war themselves, because they were 12 very powerful magic users that were on the battlefield against the demons and such of Gloostrads. So just a quick note there.
Proved to be the building blocks of his tutelage. In order for one of his students to earn the staff, which was the symbol of their craft, each apprentice would have to read the Principles of Art, and in their own time, eventually create their own copy of this mighty tome.
Yeah, they made copies. I think Bias has rewrote a ton of times, but it's knowledge based. High art is taking the knowledge of our world and using it to temper the other side. So they're pulling from the other side. It's implied that the ability to pull from the other side is some kind of genetic inherent ability, but being able to actually use it in any viable way is what you need high art for. And presumably there's some form of, whenever you pull it from the other side, you have to know how to even pull it out. But it's definitely clear that not anybody can be a Magi, but there's no rules set at all of who can do it. Also, the staff is like basically just pure ceremonial because they don't need the staff. But I do think it's funny that it's like a symbol. It's like the classic wizard needs a staff thing. But it's funny little.
As Juvens, possessing the blessings of his father Uz, was the only individual within the school capable of mastering and utilizing all elements of the high art, his students specialized in their own niche areas. Juvens.
They each have a couple different skills. Like Bias is obviously will and fire, and there's force. That's definitely seen in his little abilities. Many times the abilities are more subtle, that you don't actually see their magic like actually being cast or anything like that. But other times they're going at it and they're throwing fireballs and shit. So they all have their own little niche areas. Presumably Juvens could do everything, and that's what made him so OP. But Juvens also learned high art from his father. It seems to me that Juvens probably had his ability given to him from his father, from Eus, whereas Canadius is his pure skill, because anybody can learn it, as far as we can tell. Obviously, Badesh just seems to be more in a spiritual aspect, so it's kind of inconsistent, or at least we just don't know the factors of why some of the sons got inherent abilities while others just got kind of the knowledge to be able to do more. So presumably they can all pull from the other side, which implies that they could all do high art because they all have devil blood. But at the same time, it's never talked about how Canadius specifically can't. But Canadius' skill is learned, so there's kind of a gray area. But definitely Juvens was the favored child because he got the most overall, period. Like, being able to use high art is by far the most, especially since you can learn the other skills. And talking to spirits is cool and has its own niche abilities, but it's not really productive, I guess, in terms of building and doing things, so... Whoops.
Founded the Order of Magi with good intentions, but soon trouble began brewing within its ranks. When a feud amongst his apprentices, Baez and Khalul, erupted, Juvens took action to nip the argument in the bud.
They're the first and second, so they were. It's not said how quickly he got all of the Magi together, but presumably him and Baez were around each other the longest, and were probably vying for Juvens' attention longer than the others.
Baez was sent to one of the great libraries which Juvens had constructed in the far north.
Also, those two, Khalul and Baez, were having problems even before the war, but after the war, maybe with whatever happened, with the trauma of all the battles and things like that, it seemed to have gotten worse, despite them presumably probably fighting together.
While Khalul was sent to the Great Southern Library, ensuring the two combative Magi were as far away from each other as possible. However, this would have unexpected consequences, as both parties would continue to plot their revenge in the far extremities of the world.
Small detail here, not small detail at all. They put a lot of work into making sure all this stuff matched up. You have the Eilish Shibulion, and Thond, and Midderland, and the North. In terms of I like how they have highlighted here that Canadius wasn't in charge of the whole island/continent of Midderland, because it was just basically around Adua. Well, later on Adua, just the House of the Maker. But as a note here, on the Western continent, it is definitely known the old empire owned all of the continent, even at this time. I think they might be trying to go for, the war reduced the empire, which it certainly did. So maybe that's kind of what they're kind of show here. But it seems to me more like, they saw a map and they recreated it or used somebody else's draft. And, this is the old empire because this is the modern day borders. Old empire is kind of all over the place, but that's the borders of the old empire as of yet. And so they just went with that rather than showing them own all of Far Country, all of Stark Land, and beyond, is what they say. So just a small note there. But I also wanted to point out as well that Juvens would not be in Alcus because Alcus is a wasteland. I understand why they did it, probably because, they never state where he was otherwise, but he definitely would be in probably Darmium or something like that, one of the, a different big city. Because Alcus was not, you couldn't stay there at all. Way too dangerous.
A stark contrast to Juvens' preferred outcome. Baez would continue to seek out greater power which would give him the upper hand in any future conflict with Khalul, which led him to the House of the Maker. In Cannedius, Baez gained a new master, one who could teach him aspects of the magic of the world outside of the realms of the High Art. Baez moved to the realm which would one day become the heartland of the Union. Here he became apprenticed to a new master. Yet
this is pretty cool how they're showing like gears and clocks and stuff, or clockwork, because to some degree, Cannedius there's no difference on balance. A lot of his stuff is talked about being just pure science, and a lot of it's talked about being pure like other side magics, and then there's like the combination of the two. So obviously there's the mechanical dragon that the dragon people had, which seems to be just pure mechanical, which is insanely impressive. But on the other hand, then you have the House of the Maker, which we'll talk about more later, but it's basically none of this world at all. I mean, you can't mechanically build it. I guess the walls, the interiors, but it's completely unharmed. Like, there's no materials out there. If anything, he at least used the materials to make the House of the Maker from the other side. So it's pretty cool though how they show this here, because it is true. I think they lean more towards the scientific aspect, but that's where the gray area comes of what Cannedius can do. Can other people that learn Cannedius's works, can they also use the knowledge from the other side, or can they just use the tempered knowledge like Baez does later on with the salt and the 11 wards and 11 wards reversed? Because that was obviously just scientific knowledge base. Whereas it may not be clear if Baez can actually use magic to form and change pieces of the other side into something viable, like Cannedius obviously does. So maybe that's the gift that Aves gave him. But
yet here the impatience and arrogance at the heart of Baez would come to the fore. Although Cannedius utilized Baez's proficiency in the High Art for his work, he was far more unwilling than his brother Juvens to share his secrets. Baez grew increasingly angered with the Maker for refusing to properly teach him, and soon set out on his own to garner the knowledge he so sought. This led Baez to search through the House of the Maker in order to glean what might be of use in his persistent rivalry with Khalul.
I'm not under the idea that everything he did was just to come after Khalul. I know that they're looking at this from an in-universe perspective, so that's alright, because that's basically kind of what the histories say, is that they have a rivalry. But I don't think it was just that. I mean, Baez has always sought knowledge and power, even without the impending doom of his brother coming after him. Also, when he started searching around here, and then they kind of mention it later on, but it's kind of confusing because it implies that he started looking for stuff while Cannedius was there. Cannedius went on a trip, and then they'll say later he comes back, but Baez would never have gone looking around on his own in the House of the Maker with Cannedius around. Like, that was he did not do that. He waited for him to leave, and he also didn't just like stop trying to learn things from Cannedius. He was still trying to learn things, but then he also, every opportunity he could, he would try to find another way or try to learn something else that Cannedius might have been hiding.
In so doing, Baez stumbled upon the greatest secret of the Master Maker, the existence of his daughter Ptolemy. For the entirety of her existence, Ptolemy had been left alone in the darkness of the House of the Maker, and by the time Bias had come across her, she had never once spoken to another person. Cnedius had created her for a sole purpose, to aid her father in his work within the Hall of the Maker.
Yeah, probably.
In essence, she served as little more than a tool in her father's machinations.
I think it's cool that, you know, like, I love the artwork and stuff, how they're showing her like kind of all lonely and stuff, like the stereotypical princess locked in the tower kind of thing. But she had, in fact, probably met some other people in the House of Maker. There was, can't remember I think it's Jeremias, maybe, is Cnedius' like secretary, his helper. He's only mentioned like once, maybe twice. And I'm pretty sure she probably would have met him. So, and to no one else other than Cnedius, maybe that's true. But it just seems unlikely because there were a lot of people running around in the House of the Maker at one point. But it sounds more dramatic like this, so I'm in for it. Also, I love how Bias, this is obviously supposed to be Bias, right? Like finding Ptolemy. I love how he's bald here still. Because he talks about how he used to have hair and everything like that, like before. And at this time, he's supposed to have had hair. So, just a funny little detail.
In Cnedius' great works, she would handle the materials which only those belonging to the bloodline of mighty Uz could carry without being destroyed.
She could do it because she's a devil blood, not because she's just of the bloodline of Eus. But again, it sounds more dramatic that way. But it's just because she's a devil blood. That's why he wanted to have her. That's why he had a kid, because he knew he could obviously control her, tell her what to do, manipulate her, without having to worry about their own desires and intentions. Which is super fucked up. But, I mean, who isn't inside this series?
Ptolemy was also a beautiful being, which was reflected by the innocent kindness of her soul. Before long, she and Bias became lovers. In the tender embrace of Bias, the first man she had ever spoken to and would ever love, Ptolemy revealed the plans of her father Cnedius. The Maker had searched far and wide, bringing items from all across the circle of the world to his house. These relics of a time long past were fragments from the other side, brought into the world when demons still roamed far and wide. Cnedius planned to use these artifacts, tapping into their being and imbuing his machines with this immense power. He had found some success in this regard.
I think that for the Bias Ptolemy note there, they fell in love, yes. It's obviously very clear that they both loved each other. Bias has a whole bunch of slew of his own personal problems, like narcissism and stuff, and there's a certain amount of, for lack of a better term, like grooming, because obviously she's this naive girl, and Bias by this point is already at least a couple hundred years old, maybe 1,000 years old. Like, he's pretty old by now. He just is aging slowly. And not to say that you can't fall in love with somebody way younger than you or something like that, but there's a big difference between meeting somebody who's also, you know, just a mature, aged person, and falling in love with them, and somebody who is completely naive to the world. So there's a lot of questionable actions on Bias's part there. I mean, of course he fell in love with her. She probably agreed with everything he said, and he just, you know, gave her what she wanted, which was attention and love that Cnedius never gave her. So they definitely loved each other, but I don't know how fucked up it actually was. And seeing as what we find out later, I'm sure it was more selfish than it's kind of perceived here. But as for the things that she tells him, it's not that. She just basically told him what she knew, which is, Cnedius' compartmentalization. She had her to handle objects. Why would he need her to handle objects? So I think he kind of found that out just by being around her. Why was she there in the first place? Is so that she could handle artifacts that no one else could.
However, in doing so, he was effectively breaking the first law. Bias, having witnessed the destruction of Alcus due to Glustrod's foolishness, deemed it necessary to tell Juvens. However, fearing for Ptolemy, he tarried on delivering the news. This lack of haste brought with it further devastating consequences, as Cnedius returned from his travels and found the young couple together. His illicit affair discovered, Bias would barely escape with his life and fled towards him.
There's an idea that Bias would not have done anything because he did love Ptolemy, because he also didn't really care about Cnedius actually using the other side. It was more the other way around. He got caught and didn't want Canadius coming after him. So then he runs over here to Juvens and causes problems there because, you know, he was worried about Ptolemy. Or maybe Ptolemy knew something. Maybe Bias told her his plans, and so when he found out, he had to cover his ass. So it's definitely not. I don't think it's less of a, oh, I have to protect Ptolemy, I can't tell Juvens so that Canadius doesn't get in trouble. And I think it's more of a, oh shit, I got caught, I have to cover my tracks now.
His former master. Bias eventually reached the domain of Juvens, who, despite the betrayal of his first apprentice, could still not bear to turn him aside. Juvens provided shelter for his young disciple, who presumably informed him of Canedius's plans to break the first law in his tinkering. Shortly after, Canedius, furious at Bias's trespasses upon his daughter, was soon also standing before the doors of the house of Juvens.
Maybe.
The two brothers would argue, and when Bias returned to his master's home, he found Juvens dead, slain by the Maker himself. It is believed that in order to lay low the master of the high art, Canedius made use of the Divider, a weapon he himself had created. This weapon resembled an axe in composition, with a long handle which was made from tiny tubes of metal, which twisted and wrapped around each other. The end of the Divider...
It's kind of hard to tell in 2D, but that's pretty cool how they have that set up, because it is what it kind of would look like. Obviously, if you were to turn it, not 2D angle, the holes would kind of be facing outwards, kind of like a like a hook like this, and the holes would be on the bottom. That's kind of the way it looks, so it shoots out. But this is still a really cool rendition of what it may look like. And yeah, I don't know what's going with that. I'll have to cut that part.
Was composed of a flattened piece of metal with small holes and a long thin hook curving out from it. This mighty weapon, which was likely created using the power of the splinters of the other side left over from the old times, brought to an end the life of wise Juvens. This story had been...
It's heavily implied that it was the Divider. The question is who actually used the Divider?
Down through the years by Bias, who brought the tale of Juvens' death to the Order of the Magi in an attempt to secure himself a leadership role within the organization after the void left by his master's death. He rallied to his side 10 of the 11 within the Order of the Magi. All but Khalul would accept his leadership in the pursuit of revenge. Khalul would not believe the version of events detailed by Bias, and instead lay the blame for their master's death at the feet of Bias himself, returning to the south to continue his plotting. Undeterred, Bias led the Order of the Magi in force against Canedius, bringing them to the very gates of the imposing House of the Maker. This gargantuan structure at the very center of the Circle of the World was nigh impenetrable, even...
Nigh it was impenetrable, period. I mean, this is a cool little rendition of it. I wonder, like, if this is actually from the first law, or, like, they made it just for this video. It's definitely a lot less, like, tower, like, slit, like, flat side. It's kind of like a big old rough tower spire of rock, which is pretty crazy to think about, and it's way up there. Your original thought is that it's as high as a skyscraper, but they built some pretty high towers in Adua later in the series. Not crazy high, but, you know, they don't even compare to the House of the Maker. Like, they look tiny, and these are, like, you know, 20 story buildings on the biggest side, which I know isn't crazy huge, but, you know, it's a big size, and they still look minuscule. We're talking, like, House of the Maker is like the size of a mountain, like, in height. And when they say impenetrable, which we'll touch base here, they threw everything they had at it. These Magi in the war were blowing apart mountains with fireballs and shooting lightning that could, you know, chain lightning through hundreds of enemies. These guys were the most powerful, or still are the most powerful beings in the Circle of the World, and they couldn't scratch it. So if they can't, I don't imagine anybody could.
To incredibly talented wielders of the high art. There were no windows in the unfathomably high walls of the structure, which resembled a mountain more than it ever could a dwelling. The only weak point in the entire structure, if one could call it that, was the door to the House of the Maker. This square of burnished dark metal consisted of a set of 2 circular etchings. The circles were further composed of large and small letters, utilizing a spidery script, which ensured that the entrance was warded from any
potential aggressors. So there's an implication that Juvens is the one who warded the door for Canadius back whenever they were still friendly with each other, because these same kinds of symbols, these only potential aggressors can't get in, any potential aggressors can't get in, is what is on the Northern Library, and presumably on the Southern Library, and definitely also on the Western Library, where Colonel is later on. This is like a different form of high art, and we don't really see it used, which is like this kind of rune magic where you are able to put down wards and different kinds of abilities and powers onto, stone or a building or a structure or whatever. It seems to be very, very powerful. In terms of the Northern Library's ability, like, you can't even see it if you're trying to come there with negative intentions. You just can't even find it. It's very powerful, and they seem to last forever. So here, there's a cool fact that the doors are 11 wards and 11 wards reversed. There's no implication to talk about what those actually mean, but obviously they're just super powerful ward, the most powerful one that you can have. The fact that the House of the Maker itself is like, it seems to be a piece of the other side, made into a structure. I think it's a really awesome detail that the 11 wards, 11 reversed are in the door, not just to keep things out, but to keep things in. Because when you go inside, it obviously is completely different to anything in the actual in real life, in the real world, compared to it's much closer to the other side. So these doors, I think, when you put it on there, yes, it's cool that they can keep things out, but it's even cooler the detail that it's almost an entrance into the other side in a way. But I think it's cool that Joe was able to lay that out in a story like this without directly saying so.
Potential aggressors. As a result, the entirety of the power which the Order of the Magi could bring to bear was insufficient to make even a dent in the defenses of the Maker.
Maybe they could get in if they weren't aggressors?
This would cause Bias to turn to his greatest asset, not his mastery of the high art, and certainly not his burgeoning leadership skills, rather his base cunning, of which he had vast reserves. The silver-tongued first of the Magi poured honeyed words into the ears of the naive Ptolemy, and convinced her.
No clue how they communicated? What, did she put her out the window? Well, there's no windows, right? Did she go out into it? There's balconies, though. Did she go out on the balcony and was like, oh, yes? It'd be funny if that was the case, because it'd be even funny to think about Canadius not, saying anything about it. She just pokes her head out, says, hey, and he's like, hey, you should totally open the door. It's pretty fun. I wonder how they communicated. Maybe some forward magic or something, I don't know.
To open the door to the House of the Maker. The gate now open, the Order of the Magi rushed forward, unaware of just what awaited them. Indeed, while the house was vast by any ordinary perceptions, the building itself was capable of altering the very core concepts of space and time.
Like the other side, man.
This gave the Maker an advantage which evened the playing field, as the Magi were forced to battle Canedius chamber by chamber, dealing with his traps and inventions as they passed through the depths of the Great House. In the earliest element of the confrontation, the Magi Zacharias and Corneille were badly injured and rendered incapable of continuing the fight. Worse yet, Anselmi and Broken Tooth were laid low by the Maker in the brutal fighting within the house.
It's cool how they're pointing out those little details. The Magi were very, very powerful, and as we'll see here in a minute, Bias obviously 1v1s the Maker and wins. So there's a big implication, unless you got the divider at that point as well. There's a big implication here that, he had also created, he had traps and stuff. But Canadius himself, knowing what a Devil Blood is like, I wouldn't be surprised if he could just kill these guys with his bare hands. Because Devil Bloods, especially ones that have touched the other side or have accessed their potential, which is, you can watch my Devil Blood video for more details on that. But the Devil Bloods who are kind of unlocked their abilities are extremely overpowered. As you see in the series with Ptolemy, she and him and all the other people who have Devil Blood just are inherently way, way stronger. So I wouldn't be surprised if, between the divider, maybe a few traps. I think he was less trap oriented and more just you are so confused because you go down a hallway, you don't know where the hell you're gonna go. It could feel like you're walking for days, and Canadius the whole time is waiting for his moment to strike and just ambushes you, breaks your neck, goes on to the next person. But it is a pretty terrifying thought. Plus, who knows what kind of like magical weapons he had other than the swords and stuff. He could have been throwing some kind of bombs and things like that at him too. But I imagine Canadius was a bit more hands-on. I know it doesn't sound like something he'd do, but he's fighting for his life here, and we know Devil Bloods are very, very physically strong. So, and also I still like how they named all the little details, like the Selmy and Broken Tooth were killed, and Zacharias and Colneal were injured. It's a nice detail.
Leaving the Order further depleted. As the conflict began to draw to its final bloody conclusion, Bias was left isolated from the rest of his Order, and forced to face the Maker Canedius alone. Bias stood upon one end of a bridge high upon the tower, with Canedius and his daughter Ptolemy taking up their position on the opposite end. The two men fought, bringing to bear all of the strength which remained to them following the brutal chamber-by-chamber battles which had been waged within the bowels of the tower. During the dying embers of the fight, Canedius supposedly threw his daughter from the bridge, from where she would endure a long fall and a crushing death at the foot of the House of the Maker. Bias, empowered by the loss of his love Ptolemy, fought on valiantly, despite the superior strength of his adversary, who had held the Order of the Magi at bay with his might alone. In the end, Bias was to triumph and cast his adversary from the bridge, to follow his daughter to her death. At least this is the official story that the first of the Magi has told in the years that followed.
As for why he beat him, before we wrap up with the ending stuff here, Canadius was definitely going to be worn out. I mean, Bias would not have brought all the other Magi if he could just thought he could 1v1 Canadius from the first thing. I think this was circumstance. Either Bias, knew that he kind of beaten back Canadius enough that he could beat him in 1v1. I don't think the other Magi were respecting the 1v1. I think most of them were probably lost in the tower, trying to help their friends, or would trap themselves. Plus, there's the whole aspect of the Shenka being around. He did create the Shenka here, which are not mentioned in this video at all, but he did create the Shenka to try to fight the Magi, just have a mindless horde to bog them down. Presumably, there were at least quite a few Shenka inside of the building. Maybe I could be wrong about that. They're never mentioned, but I could see how they could be the ones running around causing mayhem, even if the Magi aren't looking. At the same time, I can't see Canadius just letting Shenka roam free, but between giving equipment to his followers to help defend, and he himself being physically worn out, it makes sense that Bias would have been able to take him out, because who knows how long they'd been down there, running around and things like that. Plus, Bias is extremely powerful, which is why Khalul never has faced him on-one, because Bias seems to be, at least noticeably, maybe not by a huge margin, but noticeably more powerful than other Magi on their own. So,
other accounts of the duel persisted too. For example, Yulwe, a Magi who was at the battle, recounted that he saw Canedius fall first, then Ptolemy. However, it was Bias's version which gained traction, and was accepted as the established truth for generations to come. Canedius and Ptolemy were both buried beneath the shadow of the House of the Maker, and Bias would take the keys of the house, leaving it sealed for the generations to come. So came to an end the last son of Uz, and with his death the world was lessened, with new nations arising, and the disciples of Juvens left to manipulate events from the darkness. A darker world, no longer fueled by the possibility of innovation and the betterment of mankind. Rather, a world committed to a continued and undeniable descent, driven by the unwillingness of the Magi to see beyond their own petty divisions and fashion a new world for those who relied so dearly upon their stewardship.
Okay, I see what they're going for. It's kind of a cool, oh no, they ruined the future and things like that. But I don't think that's correct. I mean, Juvens, the original setup of why things started going to shit was because Glustrad had a petty. He didn't get any gifts from his father, right? And so he went to war with his brothers because they wouldn't give him any gifts, because they didn't even want to be around him, presumably. They weren't there for him. They just kind of abandoned him. So that was kind of their fault. And then they just became more and more divided. Who knows where Badesh went? And then, Canadius obviously started having problems with Juvens. They got along for a while, and then Juvens started having problems with Canadius, and either one way or the other, Juvens died. Juvens was a great leader and obviously built the nations up and things like that. But he also had his hand on everything. Was he good? Probably not. And Canadius as well is also he wasn't sharing any of his knowledge. He just was tinkering around and stuff. He shared it with some of his followers, but he wasn't trying to make the world better. Maybe he was, but he certainly wasn't being open about it, either because he didn't want Juvens to know, or because he was selfish. And seeing how he treated Ptolemy, he wasn't the best guy either. So I don't agree with the narrative that the Magi with their petty squabbles is what ruined the world. I think it belittles what Joe does, which is just point out that every person is a person. They all have their own desires and petty squabbles and all of that. And the Magi are kind of just a reflection and a carrying down of the generations of people who have kept doing that. The Magi are just around now. It's kind of this idea. It's an appeal to traditionalism that isn't quite accurate, especially for the First Law world. But it's kind of a cool thing, like, oh my god, they ruined everything.
However, this is a tale for our next video on the history of the First Law series, which will focus on the construction of the Union and the Gurkish Empire, through the machinations of Bayaz and Kalul respectively. The next few videos in this series will be dedicated to the efforts of the Magi to forge a new path forward in the Circle of the World.
It's exciting.
But we're planning to cover the battles of many other fantasy, sci-fi and space opera universes, so make sure you have subscribed and pressed the bell button.
Yeah, go subscribe to it, please. It's pretty cool that they actually came on here. They have some other videos. There's one of them saying like why they love the First Law, and definitely going to watch that because that seems pretty cool. Oh look, my video is recommended. How cool is that? So I'm definitely gonna watch some more of these videos and create some other reactions to it. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'm gonna try to create more content like this. So I will see you guys next time.